A very warm welcome and a very good morning from my side. My name is Christian Hochfeld. I'm the Executive Director of Agora Transport Transformation, Agora Verkehrswende, a German-based think tank, and I welcome you to our webinar today, Charging Infrastructures in Cities, a dialogue between the Netherlands and Germany, which we jointly organize together with the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Germany. Good old friends, we organized a couple of events. Unfortunately, we cannot do this in the wonderful rooms of the embassy here in Berlin due to the COVID situation, but hopefully we will have a good time also here virtually in the Zoom matrix. So once again, a very warm welcome. It's fantastic that you take your time to discuss with us the important issue of building charging infrastructure for electric vehicles in our cities. Before we get into the discussions and into the content, let me just clarify a couple of organizational issues which you may all already aware of doing so many Zoom meetings over the last 2 years. But nevertheless, please use the chat function if you have technical questions or technical problems. My colleague Marisa, who is with us today, hopefully find a solution for you and will definitely help you with technical issues. So please, the chat room is for technical questions or technical problems. If you have remarks or questions content-wise regarding the presentations or also the panel discussion, please be so kind to use the Q&A. It's F&A in the German version of Zoom. So Fragen and Antworten, question and answers. This is the place where you can type in your questions or comments from the side of the auditory. My colleague Fanny, who is also with us today, will help to sort these questions and remarks, and we will try to cover as many of them and the content of them, as many of those content also in our panel discussion following later. Last point, we will also record this, do a recording of the session, because we also were reached by a couple of people who would like to get the content and were very much interested in the session, but are not available in the morning. So we will do a recording and also put it on our website and in the YouTube channel that people can also access this recording and the discussions we have later on, which I think is a good point. Having said this, I hope everything is prepared and fine. And I would like to give a short content-wise introduction before I hand over to the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Germany for a welcome note. Although the sun is shining today and the world looks nice, especially here in Berlin, I think we have this seminar in unbelievable times, in war times, when the war came back to Europe. And I think only weeks ago, no one hoped or no one believed that this time could come back to Europe again. And definitely, I think most of our thoughts and feelings are with the people in the Ukraine who die and suffer from an illegal attack under international law from Russia. But nevertheless, this is with the COVID crisis. This war puts also a spotlight on many mistakes and failures we did in the past, not only from the security policy point of view, but also with regard to our climate policies, that we feel and see that we really missed a lot of opportunities already to get more independent from fossil fuels, especially from fossil fuels from Russia. But I mean, it's now clear, the message is even clearer, that we definitely have to speed and scale our phase out of fossil fuels in Europe as soon as possible. And we also see that this transport transformation, the decarbonization of the transport sector, is not only good for the climate action, but also it's a question of and a task for international security policy. And definitely to reach the climate targets in Europe under the European Green Deal, in Germany, now we call it under the Fit for 65 package. So the midterm targets for reaching a 65% emission reduction until 2030 compared to 1990. In the transport sector, the uptake as fast as possible of electric mobility plays maybe the most important, but a very important role at least to meet our climate targets in Germany and bring 15 million purely electric vehicles on the road, which is the target of the new government in Germany, which has been agreed on in the coalition contract. And on the one hand, you can say, well, everything looked good until the end of 2021. The share of EVs in the new sales fleet went up enormously, up to about more than 1 out of 3 cars which were newly registered at the end of 2021 were already electric, be it plug-in hybrid or be it purely electric vehicles. But if you look in the future, things are not looking that, things will not make me so confident that this is a natural or organic development which will continue in the near future. There are so many new also barriers and new hurdles which e-mobility has to take, be it now with the war, the generally very vulnerable supply chains. For example, the wiring, which a lot of the wiring came from Ukraine. Secondly, the prices, not only for energy resources and for energy carrier, but also for materials and raw materials we use and need for EVs. Also, those prices go up, be it nickel, cobalt, but also neon, which was hardly known before that it's in electric vehicles. Third, then we have this semiconductor crisis, or the chip crisis, which lead to the paradoxon that the car companies build those semiconductors and chips which are available in those cars with the highest margin, and that are not the EVs, that are the high consuming, mostly SUVs, which have the highest margin to contribute to their economic baseline. So, and at least the ramp up of battery and gigafactories take a lot of time. And we will also only see higher capacities in the coming years. And last but not least, also the regulatory environment is not that EV friendly now, as the uptake in the last 2 years, at least in Germany, but also in other countries in Europe, was mainly also a reason and a consequence of the CO2 regulation for newly sold vehicles, which will not have any additional effect in the next 5 up to 10 years. So again, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but definitely we have to do all we can, aside from those challenges I described, to bring electric vehicles on the road. And one of the challenge, but also one of the opportunities to solve is also installing the charging infrastructure. In Germany, a lot of concerns are that the uptake of charging infrastructure is not fast enough. The same goes with the European uptake and market and deployment of charging infrastructure. We have a huge difference from Norway, where we have maybe 20 charging points per car, to Germany, where we have 2 charging points per car, and maybe also then in Eastern Europe, where we have 0.2. So we see that there's a huge differences, and definitely it's needed that we need more charging infrastructure, but not only more, but also from a quality point of view, better charging infrastructure. And most of these issues will culminate and come together when it comes to building charging infrastructure in cities, where most of the people, compared to more rural and suburban areas, don't have an own parking place. So where they don't have the opportunity to have charging at home or at work. In this regard, in the next years, one of the, I would say, biggest focal areas of building charging infrastructure is to, also get more attention and more awareness that we need more charging infrastructures in cities, publicly accessible infrastructures in cities, and this is where we can learn from each other. I think it's really necessary that we intensify the international dialogue on how to do this and learn from those who are quite successful in it. And therefore, I'm very happy that today we can exchange with our colleagues and friends from the Netherlands, who are, I would say, ahead of us in building charging infrastructure. So we will have 2 presentations today, one from Utrecht and one from Hamburg, to describe their ways in regard of building charging infrastructure. And afterwards, we will discuss how we can learn from this good examples. I think Hamburg is also a very good example for the German discussion. And with a lot of really high competent and experienced people, and we are very proud that we can have this seminar today. But before we get into the content-wide discussion, I'm now happy to hand over to Ronald van Roden, who is the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Germany. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it in person, but fortunately, he did a recording before, and we are happy to play now the recording and then get into the content-wise discussion. Thank you very much, and I hand over to Ronald van Roden.
Dear Dr. Klaassen, dear Mr. Ehrenberg, dear Mr. Hochveld, dear panelists, dear participants, welcome to today's dialogue on charging infrastructure in cities. It's a pleasure to see so many participants from different sectors at this digital event. Cities in the Netherlands are well known for their high numbers of cyclists, but we stand for much more in the field of urban mobility. For years, and this is probably a little less well known, the Netherlands has also had the highest density in charging infrastructure. In addition, we strongly promote the transition towards emission-free cities through our smart city logistics, because it is often in cities where one sees potential for change, and this definitely goes for mobility. On my daily journey to the embassy in Berlin, I come across various new forms of urban mobility, like shared bikes, e-scooters, or shared cars. And this reflects our rethinking of our day-to-day movements in order to reach climate neutrality in 2050. Battery electric vehicles, however, are only one element in achieving these common sustainability goals. In both Germany and the Netherlands, we are fully committed to achieving these goals and to do so by implementing new regulations for the years ahead. And the recently presented measures in the Fit for 55 package set new standards for alternative fuel infrastructure throughout Europe. I'm honored to host two of our best practices here today to inform us on how charging infrastructures can be successfully implemented at a local level. Hamburg and Utrecht can be seen as frontrunners and may inspire others to follow their example. Utrecht in particular has developed close ties to other German cities as well. And during last year's IAA conference in Munich, representatives from Utrecht visited the Bavarian capital to exchange knowledge on the relevance of smart city logistics in urban areas. And in 2020, the Netherlands Embassy organized a series of web talks with German municipalities on how to address the transition to battery electric transportation. And since then, we frequently inform these regions on developments in the Netherlands via our e-mobility newsletter. Now, our most prominent project to date is the Dutch-German Sustainable Mobility Cooperation. And this public-private cooperation serves as a platform to stimulate knowledge exchange and economic interaction between our countries. Economic cooperation across the border in the fields of automotive, energy and high-tech will bring new solutions to achieve smart mobility. To conclude, I feel that today's dialogue offers an excellent contribution to that knowledge exchange. And I would like to thank Agora Verkehrswende for partnering with us to facilitate this meeting, and I wish you all an inspiring exchange of views. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Mr. van Roden, even if you cannot hear this in time, but definitely, hopefully someone will let our gratefulness know him. And without further ado, I think Mr. van Roden perfectly set the scene. We will go on, and I'm very happy to welcome now with us Matthijs Kook from Utrecht. He's a senior policy advisor, emission-free transportation, and works as a transition manager for the city of Utrecht in the field of electric mobility, charging infrastructure, and smart grids. And we all agreed here in the seminar today to use the first name. It fits better to the English language than mixing it with German kindness. And in this regard, without further ado, I hand over the floor to Matthijs, and I'm very much looking forward to learn from the experiences of Utrecht in building infrastructure in the city of Utrecht. So Matthijs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation today. I will give a short introduction on how we in Utrecht work on the rollout of charging infrastructure. This presentation was to be given by our alderman Eelco Ereberg. Unfortunately, he had to be excused because we had elections 3 weeks ago, and they are all busy on the formation of the new board. So I will do the presentation he was supposed to do today. I'll start with a short introduction on Utrecht and our goals and challenges. And the second part of the presentation will be about our charging infrastructure strategy. So Utrecht, it's the fourth largest city of the Netherlands. The Netherlands has about 70 million inhabitants, and in Utrecht live about 40,000 inhabitants. It's a very beautiful city. You should really, as you see, you should really now it's possible again. Come over and have a look at our medieval city center. You can see here and the dome. In the city, we have about 140,000 passenger cars. As explained before, as in Germany, about 70% of the cars in the city park in public space. So from a charging infrastructure perspective, that's our challenge. The motto of our progressive city board and city council is healthy urban living. So environmental themes are really important, And that's why we have been working already for a long time on some sustainable transport and electric mobility and stimulating that. Our city is of course known for cycling. What you like other German cities. What you see here is the parking lot for parking bikes at the central station. It's the biggest train station of the Netherlands with 300,000 travelers every single day. And most people come to the central station with their bike, and they can park them in a built garage, which is the largest in the world with 12,000 places for parking your bike underneath the railway station. And of course, we have a lot of cycling in our city. Every day, about 100,000 people roam through our city center every day. And it's getting crowded as well in our city. Here you see the before COVID situation, but we recorded the first bicycle traffic jam in our city in front of an important bicycle route right through the city center in front of a stop sign. So more people, more cars, but more bicycles, but also more cars. The city is getting more crowded. It's a growing city. It's the fastest growing city of the Netherlands, and that leads to other challenges we have with air quality. We do not meet all the air quality levels that are required by the European Union. Also, road traffic noise is an issue, and we have high ambitions on climate neutrality, which also is challenging from a mobility perspective. And since we are working on climate neutrality as fast as possible and healthy urban living, we are really working also from a mobility perspective on changing these issues. We are working on that on different levels, and we see this from a Trias Mobilica perspective. We are working on policies to reduce the number of trips. That's the most important part. If you do not travel, you do not emit any air quality issues or climate reduction. So travel less is the first thing we are working on. Important measures are working from home. Well, COVID helped a lot with that. But also we have in our urban strategy, the 10-minute city, we call it, which means we are building new city parts, new centers in the city where facilities are close to where the people live, so they can walk or cycle easily towards their sports or towards their grocery store, which reduces the amount of traveling in the city. The second part is about travel differently. That's about changing to more sustainable modes of traveling. So that's of course cycling is really important. Public transport, car sharing is a different mode. And the third is, and that's the last one, if you need to travel, do it as efficiently and as sustainable as possible. And electric mobility is one example of that. So if you're going to travel, preferably with no climate emissions. So from that perspective, we've been working on electric mobility and facilitating it for over the last 10 years now. And this is a forecast of the amount of electric cars we see to come to our city. And we expect to have in 2025, 1 out of 5 cars electric in Utrecht. And in 2030, 1 out of about half of the cars will be electric. It's important to notice that the ambition of our city board is to have zero emission zone for passenger cars in 2030. So that brings this for the city center. So that's why this figure is really high. Right now, about 4 to 5% of all cars in the city is fully electric. And to facilitate these electric cars, already since 2011, we've been working on a charging network of public chargers. And what you see here is the annual or the monthly turnover of the amount of kilowatt hours sold on the public chargers. And as you can see, over the last for many years, it has been pretty steady, around 200,000 kilowatt hours per month sold on the public chargers. And since 2019, there has been a steep growth, since there have been higher sold. Many more electric cars have been coming to the town, and now about 1 million kilowatt hours are sold every month on our public charging network. And this growth made us rethink the way we are working on the rollout of charging infrastructure. And in 2018, we made a new strategic plan on the rollout of charging infrastructure, and I will explain a bit more on that in the rest of the presentation. The central aim of this strategy is to facilitate all e-drivers with their charging needs. And that's really important because we stand for healthy urban living. If people want to choose to drive an electric car, they need to be able to charge their car. But it's also important to do that within a balanced urban charging network, because if we want to everybody, and that's 70% on-street charging, we need really a lot of chargers, a lot of public chargers. It's all extra objects in the public space, and we really need to think to do that in a balanced way. So this is the starting point of the strategy, and we translated that into 4 principles I will explain now. The first is a really important one. When we started putting chargers on the street in 2011 or 12, we did that. Somebody would buy an electric car or lease an electric car, go to the city's website and apply for a charger in the proximity of their home. This is how we developed the public charging network, an AC charging network, over that 4 or 5 years afterwards. And at this time we wrote this new strategy. We had approximately 500 chargers, you see on the map on the left, and it was still growing. But at that time we thought, well, we can wait for somebody to apply for a new charger, but we also know how the chargers are being used. And what you see here, the red dots, if it's a big red dot, the occupation of the charger is really high, and the small dots have little occupation. So the usage of chargers here is high and here it's low. So why wait for somebody to apply for a new charger if you know based on the use of the charger, on the occupation of the charger, where to put new chargers? And that's what we call data-driven rollout. So we measure and we translated that into a network system. So we measure the occupation of the chargers in every neighborhood of our city, and that's what you see on this map. And if the occupation of chargers in a certain neighborhood gets too high, then we put new chargers on the street. And that's really important, because then we can guarantee our e-drivers in the city, they can always find a free charger if they need to charge their car. And that really helps to people to make the choice for electric driving, because if they don't believe they can charge their car, they will not buy an electric car. So that really helps to facilitate the transition to electric mobility in our city, and that's what we want to reach. So with this new rollout strategy, we have been expanding our public chargers in the city. Right now we have about 2,400 public charging points in the city. and we are working on the development of 60 public fast chargers at certain locations. I will come to that in the rest of the presentation. And we have about 1,400 of the chargers are V2G ready, which makes it also in the future possible to discharge cars, which makes the network future proof, and we can also facilitate it from the grid perspective. What you see here on the map is our charging network. All the orange dots are operational chargers. The red dots are in development, and the green dots are to be developed. In 2020, we made a forecast on how many chargers we need in the year of 2025, and we already selected the locations of the chargers on the map so that we can really, based on the data, react really directly when we need the new charger in a new neighborhood. We select the location, we start the development prior to the need, so we forecast when we need this charger to put into place based on the occupation of the existing chargers, and we really facilitate the charging need in our city by this location plan for chargers. The second principle is we also work on the placement of public chargers outside of public space. Our goal is to put electricity into cars and to make this possible, but it's not necessarily done on public chargers. And if you're going to do that all on public chargers, we need a lot of chargers and a lot of objects in our public space. So we also try to stimulate, for instance, this is at our conference hall at the Messe. And we also invite people from the neighborhoods surrounding this public this private parking lot to charge their car here with lower parking fees at the semi-public locations. So people don't charge at the chargers in the street. So we have, in the end, we need less chargers in the street, and we can use the chargers in non-public locations better. The third thing we changed in this new charging strategy is before we put these public chargers on the street one by one at every location, but we couldn't keep up with the growth of the electric cars. So now we are building charging plazas, we call them. It's locations where we put 5 or 6 chargers with 2 sockets, so 8 or 10 chargers at the location at once on the street, and we make a reservation for just 2 or 3 of the locations for just electric charging, and the rest also normal cars can park. But it really helps us to speed up the rollout, because it's in one work we can put more chargers in place and facilitate the transition. And what is also really important is we are working on it's not only AC charging, but we are also working on fast charging. And a really important development is that we are going to put chargers at shopping malls and at sporting facilities in the city. The idea behind that is that when people do their grocery or do their sports and they park for just 1.5 hours or between half an hour and an hour, they can charge their car during doing groceries or sporting, and they leave this location with a full battery, and they don't need to charge their car on the public chargers in the street. So we need less chargers in the street, and the advantage of putting chargers at these locations is that there's lots of space to put the chargers at the shopping malls like this, and it's really convenient for users, for e-drivers, to charge their car during shopping or during sports. So we selected 19 locations in the cities at sporting facilities or at shops where about 60 chargers will be developed over the next years. And our hope is that this also brings less stress on the AC chargers in the streets. So this is what we've been working on over the last 3 years. AC charging network, 2,400 chargers available and 60 chargers at short parking locations. And our challenges for the next year are at other locations. So we made a forecast for what chargers we need in how the charging network will look like in 2030. And what you see here is a map of this forecast. So the orange dots is the AC charging network in 2030. We need about 5,000 chargers, as just explained. The orange locations are the sporting facilities and the chargers at the shopping malls. What we also additionally need is corridor chargers along the ring road for people who go from one city to the other city and need to charge their car at petrol stations or at petrol station-like locations along the ring road to extend their range. That's the red locations, and we need to develop those locations or to put them at the existing petrol station and replace the petrol stations by fast chargers. Another big challenge is the move to electric logistics. In 2025, there will be a zero emission zone for logistics. So all lorries, trucks, and vans who go into the city have to be electric in 2025. And that brings a big challenge for our logistics area, which is based in this part of the city. And we need in total about 300 fast chargers for charging the trucks and an additional 50 ultra fast chargers to charge the trucks during the day. And that's really a big challenge because especially from a grid perspective, that is really high power that is needed at a really specific location. So we are now working together with the grid operator to solve this problem and with the distribution logistic partners in this part of town. And that's our biggest challenge for the next year. So to summarize it, we are working for clean air and energy transition. Therefore, electric transport is really important. We are charging car in a balanced network based on a proactive data-driven rollout. And this leads to a balanced charging network in 2030 that can really facilitate the transition to electric mobility in our city. And back to you, Christian.
Thanks very much, Matthijs. That's a wonderful presentation, and it's I also like this because it's an optimistic outlook that we will definitely also or can be able to manage this transformation in the city on the city level. And I have two additional questions with hopefully a short answer. The first question, which is the role, or what is the role of the city administration? You work for the city of Utrecht, and you know, what is the role of the city and the other stakeholders involved in building the infrastructure? And the second thing is, how do you finance or who is financing the infrastructure, this charging infrastructure, be it the AC or the DC charger? Because we spend a lot of public money currently for the charger, and who is doing this in the Netherlands currently, and maybe also in the future?
Yeah, our role is to facilitate the locations and to make a traffic rule for reservating the location just for electric cars, charging electric cars. And we put out a tender for a concession for a charge point operator like Allego or Fastnet or Equens to put the chargers on the street on those locations. So it's an operation contract. So we don't do the investment ourselves. The charge point operator invests in the chargers. That goes for AC and the DC charging, and they operate the chargers for 10 years.
No problem.
They operate the chargers for 10 years. And they get the charging revenues, so the kilowatt hour payments goes to the operator, and they return the investment back over the 10 years, and of course they make a profit from it as well. And what's also important to mention is that they pay a small concession fee to the city from this for selling for operating the chargers, and that's what I'm paid from. So the program facilitating the chargers is also paid from the concession fees.
That's an interesting thing. Thank you very much. Last question is, how do you assure competition that the electricity prices for the consumer are not too high? I mean, if you have, if you just tender to one institution, be it Allego or whatever, I mean, they could set the price however they like, and
so
it could be prohibitive for the customers.
So if you tender a concession, you organize a monopoly. So and if you organize a monopoly, you should fix the price. So the price is fixed in the contract. And we select the operator based on quality, but they have to operate it for this fixed price. And it's currently it just went up because electricity prices went up, but currently it's 42 cents per kilowatt hours you pay at an AC charger, and DC is about the same.
Okay, thanks very much. That's very interesting, and I think things were very good also for the later discussion. And we're happy to have you with the discussion later on. And as we are a little bit behind times, but nevertheless, I think had a very interesting presentation from Utrecht. I hand over now to our colleague from Hamburg, which is Leonard Rommel, and he is the head of area e-mobility and alternative fuels with the city of Hamburg. And we are very much looking forward to see the approaches in Hamburg, the so-called Hamburg model on creating and building charging infrastructure in the Ulster city. So, Leonard, the floor is yours, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Christian, for introducing me. Yes, I'm going to show you the approaches to create charging infrastructure in Hamburg, also in the past as well as in the future. I start with the past. That were our milestones. We started in 2009 with our first public charging points. I think at that time I was still in school, so I don't know exactly what they did there, but I think it was kind of a pilot project. So yeah, only a few chargers to look for the opportunities in mobility. The rollout later in 2014 was introduced by the master plan in Hamburg, in which the local government decided to build up 600 public charging points until 2017. They did that to break the chicken and egg problem in the e-mobility sector. And in 2017, the targets were reached. So Hamburg built up 600 public charging points, of which about 10% were DC charging points with about 50 kilowatt. Then the local government decided to steadily build up the charging infrastructure. so that in 2019, we had about 1,000 public charging points in Hamburg. And today in 2022, we have about 1,600 public charging points, of which about 400 are on private ground. So you see, when we have the discussion about where charging points should be, there is a discrepancy at the moment between public charging points on public ground and public charging points on private ground. And we think in the future there should be and there will be more on private ground, but at the moment about a quarter only is on private ground. Also in 2022 we have now first high power chargers on public ground, and in this year we also want to increase the number of high power charging. In 2024 we have a big change here in Hamburg. At the moment, the grid operator, which is Stromnetz Hamburg, also operates our public chargers, but due to European regulations, in the future, the grid operator is not allowed anymore to operate the charging point. So from 2024 on, we need a new operator model, and we need a new public company which operates all our public charging points. And that is a big task, to transfer all our charging points into a new company. The local government also made an expansion target for 2025, and they made the target in 2020 after the elections. And the new target is to build up 2,000 public charging points up to 2025. Which means that from 2020 to 2025, we want to build up about 200 charging points per year. On this slide now, you can see the number of charging points during the last years. As I told you, at first the target was to build up 600 charging points, which we reached in January 18. And you see it's kind of a steady and linear ramp up of charging infrastructure during the last years. And what we did with that building up of charging infrastructure is to break the chicken and egg issue through our early public actions. So we, as the city, invested in infrastructure. We had high public investments, and we were all the time ahead of demand. So the occupation at the charging infrastructure was not that high, and we paid attention to a comprehensive network in Hamburg, as well as to user-friendly solutions and benefits. So in Hamburg, there are transparent costs with a lot of EMPs, which are able to operate on the charging infrastructure. We allowed free parking for electric cars in the city. There are some benefits for users to increase the number of electric cars. And we also try to make e-mobility visible and accessible for the people in Hamburg, with partners like car sharing or Moja, which is kind of an electric ride sharing. I also want to introduce you to the Hamburg model. We think it's very important that people have fair prices at charging stations. And that is why we set up a unique system where we separate the charging point operator, which at the moment is also our grid operator, Stromnetz Hamburg. We separate the CPO and the EMP, the electric mobility provider, which provides the rates at the charging station. And due to the fact that the CPO only operates the charging infrastructure, all electric mobility providers have non-discriminatory access to our charging stations. At the moment in Hamburg, there are about 50 electric mobility providers who all have access to the public charging infrastructure, and they can provide their own rates. The CPO, Stromnetz Hamburg, gets a usage price for the infrastructure. We started with that usage price in 2022. So before 2022, the usage of our infrastructure was for free, and we as a city paid for that. Now, for each kilowatt hour, we take 12 cents at a normal charging point and 20 cents for a fast charging point. And that is what the CPO gets for operating the charging infrastructure. And then all EMP, as I said, can provide their own rates, and the user can use RFID cards from various EMPs. So currently about 50. And we think that this model prevents monopoly situations and creates competition at the charging points. And we hope that we have, with this Hamburg model, very user-friendly prices. On the other side, the demand, as you can see, and I think that covers the impression that I had that the ramp up in Utrecht was until 2020, the mid of 2020, there was a small linear growth for the number of electric cars. And from the middle of 2020 on, we see that the ramp up is very increasingly high. We see that it's still a linear growth, but it's a much higher level on growth from 2020, I think about June or July on. At the moment, there are about 3.5% of the total car fleet in Hamburg, which is electric. So from about 800,000 cars in Hamburg, there are between 25 and 30,000 cars which drive electric. So with this ramp up, what future tasks do we have now? As I said, in the past, we had to break the chicken and egg problem, but now there is a demand and there are electric cars, and this situation is over. In the future, we have to meet the ramp up of electric cars, and we need a demand-driven installation of new charging points. The federal government set up targets, which mean that in Germany, we need 15 million electric cars and 1 million public accessible charging points by 2030. And we think in Hamburg, that might be a share of about 30 or 40% of electric cars. And as I said on the last slide, now we have about 3.5% electric vehicles. That means we have to increase the number of electric vehicles and charging points by the factor of 10. So we think to cover this increasing demand, we also need a further increase of high power chargers, as well on the public ground as on the private ground. And that is why we need incentives to expand the private charging infrastructure as well. On the first hand, on private ground. Therefore, we have a support program in Hamburg, which is called Elbe. And there we supported people and companies to build up charging infrastructure on private ground for private use. But we also think that we need to support private but public accessible charging infrastructure, like on fuel stations, at supermarkets, sport locations, and so on. And what we think is very important in the future is to find the right correlation between private and public accessible infrastructure. At the moment, we don't know exactly whether we need 15 or 20 or 25% as public accessible charging infrastructure. I think this is a key figure we have to get to know in the next years, and that also has a high influence on the number we need in the public space. So far from my side, thank you very much, and yeah, I'm open for your questions now, Christian.
Wonderful, thank you. I had a little bit of challenge to open my camera. Thanks very much, Lennart, for this presentation. And I think you were only at school. I was already dealing with electric mobility in '29, and it shows that Hamburg started early with the ramp up of, or let's say at least with first trial of building public charging infrastructure. My question is a little bit, you mentioned Hamburg has 800,000 cars on the road. Let's imagine that it goes also better with biking and cycling, like in Utrecht in the future, but nevertheless, it will be more than 500,000 cars whenever we think about a future where most of the transport is electrified. Don't we then need a little bit more a shift that we say in this time, maybe charging is more or less like fueling today a car, because we cannot build so many AC chargers in the street to fuel all the cars which have maybe no access to public or to private charging, sorry, to charging at home. So you mentioned the shift already, or this ratio between public and private charging, that this changes. But if we imagine really a transport system which is mainly electrified in the maybe 10, 15 years, won't we really trust mainly on high power charging and this charging hubs on wherever, if it's public or public accessible areas, fueling stations, retail companies, and so on?
Yes, I think in the future we will need a mix of all those solutions. I agree that for many people, especially in urban areas like in Hamburg, which do not have an own parking lot, we need public accessible charging infrastructure, which also charges very fast, because we don't want that many objects in the public space. We want only to build up the amount that is needed, but not more than that, because we also have many other objects which are on public ground. And that is why I think in situations where you are for like 1 or 2 or 3 hours at a point, for example, when you do sports or when you do your grocery, then it is important to have public chargers which are fast chargers accessible. But there are also times when you are at home, for example, during the night, when it's also a good case to have AC charging infrastructure. And especially in that case, we think it's also possible to have lower rates at the charging infrastructure when you do not have that high investments. And that is why we think there will be a mix, because you have different usages, and in these different cases, you also need different solutions.
Okay, thanks very much. 2 last questions, and then we go to the panel discussion. Please, a brief and short answer first. Matthijs mentioned the impressive number that I think, if I have it right in mind, a third of the chargers are already V2G ready. How is this in Hamburg? And secondly, also you in the Hamburg administration and government play an important role in coordination. How does the cooperation with the other Senate departments work, if it's transport, economy, and so on, energy. I think it's a huge coordination task also in the city to have everyone on board building the infrastructure. And how are you managing this in Hamburg?
Yes, the first question, V2G ready. Also in Hamburg, there are a lot of charging points which are technically V2G ready. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But in Germany, there are also some tasks in regulation. So there is not the perfect opportunity at the moment to do those V2G things because we don't have the regulation for that. And I think that needs time. I know that on the federal level, there are some ideas about that, how to start with these V2G things. But at the moment, it's not ready for usage. I think we can say that, but this will be a very important task in the future when we increase the number of charging points. The second question was about the coordination task we have as a city. And yes, it's true, we have a lot of authorities and different departments which need to be involved. For example, we have the townscape, which should be kept. And there are people who are not happy about the thing that high power chargers, for example, are that big and they need separate power boxes. And we all have to put those objects in the public space. But we need to make compromises on that. So there's a lot of coordination effort, but I think that's also good because when we get along with all the other authorities, then we also get new ideas on how to manage the ramp up of charging infrastructure. Sometimes things are slower because of that, but I also think these conversations are very important to also know what the other authorities think is a good solution.
Thanks, Leonard. Thanks very much. And also good to have you with us at the panel session, which will start now. And therefore, with a certain delay, and sorry for this, I have to say to my colleague Kerstin, who's our senior advisor on green vehicles, that we have this delay, but I'm sure you will manage this properly. And so I'm very happy now that we have a very high competent and experienced panel with us to discuss a couple of questions which we already here touched on the way forward for urban charging infrastructure as a key for electrifying transport in our cities. And therefore, thanks very much first for our speakers. And now I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion, and I hand over to my colleague, Kerstin. So the floor is yours, Kerstin.
Thanks, Christian. And thanks to Leonard and Matthijs for your interesting presentations and for staying on for the panel discussion. I will briefly introduce everyone on the panel before we start. So let's start with Tobias Wolny. Tobias is Senior Manager External Affairs at BP. And here in the representation of BP in Berlin, responsible for all issues related to alternative fuels, refineries, electric mobility. And before that, he has held a number of positions at BP, both in London and in Germany, that were all between the nexus of alternative energy, mobility, regulatory, and public affairs. Thank you very much for making the time. We know you had other speakers engagement today, so thanks for being here. Nancy Cabal-Groot is the chairwoman of the Dutch Formula E team, and that's a public-private partnership in the Netherlands between the business community, knowledge institutions, NGOs, and the Dutch government. And As such, it is their goal to further develop electric mobility in the Netherlands. Nancy has had extensive experience in the Dutch energy industry, where she's held management and leadership positions at a number of different companies. We're very happy that you can make it and that you're with us today. Johannes Pallasch is the head of the National Center for Charging Infrastructure in Germany. And that's a part of a German federally owned company in the field of sustainable mobility and energy supply. As such, he is responsible for both strategy and communication related to all things charging infrastructure in Germany. And he's been following the issue for quite a long time already. Maybe I won't say how long, but for a long time already. And he is therefore very deeply involved in all things regarding our future strategy on charging infrastructure. Welcome, Johannes.
Thank you very much.
You're sharing this with Harm-Jan Idema, who's also been following the Dutch strategic development of charging infrastructure for a very long time as well. And you work as a policy advisor for charging infrastructure at the Dutch Ministry for Infrastructure and Water Management. And you have long been involved in shaping numerous aspects of designing public policies for public charging in the Netherlands. So we have a very experienced panel with us, and I very much look forward to the discussion. Maybe we start with you, Johannes. When you see what Utrecht has already accomplished, do you wish the German cities would copy this? And do you think the German cities will be able to catch up really quickly? And what are you doing to support the German cities? And then I will have another question to you also, like, why are we actually spending public money on charging infrastructure when in the Netherlands, the CPOs are paying Matthijs' salary for the privilege of building charging infrastructure?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's really great what we can see from Utrecht. So that is great because they have a strategic approach and plan. And it's not just from year to year, it's a backcasting process. They focus on 2030 and well, there's a ramp up plan, and I can see this not in each city here in Germany. We saw Hamburg as a good example, but a lot of cities have not that kind of plan. They do some kind of infrastructure, but what we now need is that we have target figures for each city for 2030 so that the city or municipalities can focus on this target. And what is the approach of the German government? So 5 or 6 years ago, we went to the Netherlands and we get they showed us their planning tool from Amsterdam. And then the idea was we have to copy that. And we copied the planning tool from Amsterdam, and now we have a German-wide planning tool, so-called. And the next step is that we will have a standard planning tool 2.0 for the municipalities in Germany, because up to now, it's just can just be used by us, the government, and also the county. But the next step, we have to include also the cities and municipalities. That is a strategic approach here in Germany. So the very interesting question about funding money in this case is that I think the very early concessions in the Netherlands included also. So, and now the question is why today there's no more funding money. Well, it could be that the energy prices are different here in Germany, more taxes, for example. Yeah, but in the future, I think that has to be the model here also in our cities that, well, you give a concession. And what very interesting is that we have very heavy discussions in Germany about a price cap in our Deutschland nets. So what is happening here in Utrecht is very interesting, price cap, and it's fixed. And I think, as I heard, Mr. Koch has no problem with that, and it's very good for the customer. So I would like to know more about that. And yeah, the idea now in Germany is, I think we need more funding money or money for tenders, but at the end, it's part of the normal market activities.
Okay, Mr. Koch, do you directly want to elaborate? Matthijs, do you directly want to elaborate very quickly on this point, on the design aspects of your scheme?
On how the concession works. Yeah, it's not even that complex. We put a tender into the market for asking an operator to operate charges for a period of 10 years. They put the charges on the street and pay for the investment. That's about 4,500 euros per charger. And they get the revenues from the charging from the users of the charge point, which is about, as I explained before, 34 cents of 42 cents per kilowatt hour, and they can earn their investment back over the next 10 years. And it's important to say each charger has a turnover of about 10,000 kilowatt hours per year. So that's a high usage, maybe compared to what I just learned from Leonard. If you do really proactive placements, you have less usage than that, because we put charges based on the data, we know the charges will be used frequently because there's demand for it. So that's why that's also helpful for the operator, this model, because they know in front, if we put the charger into place, we know it's going to be used and we can earn back our investments. So that's why the system works, I guess.
Okay, thanks very much. I have a follow-up question to Harmjan. Now, Utrecht has given a lot of thought to this and they've had a lot of people working on this, but what about smaller cities who don't have the capacity? Also in the Netherlands, I'm sure there are smaller municipalities. What do you do in that case, and how does the federal level support them?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a good question as well. What we see in the Netherlands is that we will have 4 major cities like Utrecht, The Hague, Amsterdam, and Rotterdam, who are able to tender, like Matthijs explained, their own charging network and to fund it by the investments of the private parties. Furthermore, we have many regions in the Netherlands who have these smaller cities and have these challenges in how to develop their public charging networks. What we try to do and what we're working on right now is to make a cooperation between the federal government and the regions in the Netherlands. So we have defined 6 regions, where 1 region is the 4 bigger cities and 5 more rural regions we have in the Netherlands. And these regions are supporting the smaller cities and municipalities in that region with a public tender. So they are able to collect all the charging needs that they have. So one city has, for example, maybe the need of 20 or 40 charging stations. But by putting them all together, we're able to make a tender with enough scale for private companies to invest in the charging infrastructure. And maybe one thing to add on what Matthijs already explained about the concession model is that one thing that makes it successful is that we are working with long-term contracts. So we're talking about contracts for 10 years, for example, which include an installation period of 2 to 4 years and an exploitation period of 6 to 8 years. So there's a long time for the private companies or charge point operators to gain enough revenue to get their investments back. So that's even part of the business model. So this means that each region or each city has to tender their concessions, let's say once in 2 to 4 years.
Okay, that's very helpful for elaborating. But I mean, it's not only an issue of spatial planning and designing the market conditions, right? I mean, it's also relevant to have the cooperation between different participants of the whole charging network ecosystem. So my next question would go to Nancy. You are actively working in a multi-stakeholder organization, and what does it do to enhance, say, the Dutch sort of spatial planning approach to charging infrastructure? What are you doing to support that?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think we're discussing the important technicalities, right, for making it work. And I think the Dutch approach, which started in 2008, I think same day Hamburg started with putting in its first charging stations in place. And already then it was starting with the coalition of the willing, right? Instead of trying to get the transition started with some force, we started with actually the ones that wanted to do it. So Den Bosch, which was the city that wanted the first charging stations, DSO got involved because they were interested in, if everybody starts driving electric, maybe it means something for my grid. So starting with that coalition, ELAD was founded and some transition was made. And I think we're still basically in that flow on all sorts of corporations, from NGOs to institutions, knowledge institutions. And starting in 2008 with the learning by doing approach, right? We had no idea. We put the first charging station there in Den Bosch. We didn't know how to pay at a charging station. We just did it and we figured it out later. And we're a lot of years, we're almost at over 15, well, almost 15 years further down the road. And now we know a lot. And what happened, actually, I would say we're in the second or maybe already in a third phase, where the learning by doing got captured in a knowledge institution, which we call NKL. So all the lessons that were gathered from cities like Utrecht, which are front runners, right? But there's also the city of, and I don't want to vent anybody, but Culemborg or Utrecht-Sterdale, which are smaller communities, which have lots more difficulties, and all the knowledge that's already in there, in place, is there for free to help support, for instance, cities that are maybe were not part of the first coalition of the willing, but now they are interested and now they want to move. So, so we're really with this whole group providing knowledge to still in a bottom-up approach, trying to move the transition forward. And I think that's typically in the Dutch approach.
Okay, thanks very much for explaining this. And business obviously plays an important role in this whole coalition of the willing, and therefore I'm also very happy to speak with BP today. Tobias, you have quite ambitious goals for the rollout of charging infrastructure in the coming years. Is EV charging the new refueling? And what role will your refueling stations play? How do you see that? How do you see the role of refueling stations in a future charging network in Germany and maybe in the Netherlands too?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kerstin. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for being here. I think it's a great idea to have such an event to learn and work out best practice between the Netherlands and Germany. I mean, just as a newspaper reader, it seems to be the Netherlands, when I think of the airport of Amsterdam, was done on electrification there. At the same time, we didn't have much electrification here, nor did we have an airport really here in Berlin, the new airport. I should just say one thing, by the way. If I cough a lot, I was just tested corona positive. And if I get into delirium and talk about biofuels or anything else, please interrupt me, Kerstin. But now I will be focused for the rest of the time. Yes, indeed, we as BP, with our flagship brand Aral here in Germany, we have high ambitions for e-mobility. I can even go as far as saying, we from the industry, we were always very much in favor of technology neutrality, technology openness. And I recall when Mr. Diess, the CEO of Volkswagen, said, forget about that. We as VW were focusing on that. There was a big outcry in the industry. And as far as road transport for cars is concerned, I think we subscribe to that right now. We place all our eggs in the basket of e-mobility. That is for passenger cars. Excuse me, I have... Yeah, and we have right now 500 charging points. By the end of this year, it will be 1,000. By the end of the year 2025, it will be 5,000. So that is our ambition. I mean, yes, we also invest in biofuels, advanced biofuels, good biofuels. And for the truck business, then it's a different story also, because there, hydrogen can play a role, or even LNG, that is bio-LNG. On that one, we're not so sure about, which technology will prevail. But again, coming back to passenger cars, it's clear to us, it's e-mobility. And on that one, we as BP certainly differ from other companies in the mineral oil industry who may also see a role for e-fuels. We are certainly not against e-fuels, we just don't see that as a priority in passenger cars, maybe different in the shipping or in the air industry. In the short term, what does that mean? It means that we have to add e-mobility chargers at our forecourts, at the existing forecourts. Now that's not so easy because, ideally we want to do it in such a way that, for example, it is under the roof, that it is centrally located close to the convenience business. It should be like a secondary location. That requires some additional investment also. Sometimes that may not even be possible given safety distances or state building regulations. But that is generally the ambition. Now, yes, after the year 2035 or earlier, we're not going to have any fossil fuel ICE cars anymore. That is new registrations, but there'll still be an existing fleet, right? So in the short and medium term, we don't see the e-chargers replacing the other fueling. It will be an addition, and for quite a while, it'll be a duality. However, the e-mobility part is going to be steadily expanded. And I should add, the focus for us is on forecourts indeed, but frankly, must it always be forecourts? We're also involved in destination charging, where, for example, in parking lots for fast food operators or shopping malls, we would also equip the parking lots with our chargers. So in a very pragmatic way, we should think about, what is the best use case? Must it be in a certain region really the forecourt? Or wouldn't it make more sense to, for example, set up something in a garage or in the parking lot of a Rewe or Edeka on the other side of the street? So there are various options there, but it's true, the focus is the forecourt, and e-mobility will play an ever stronger role in that for us.
Okay. When you mentioned the destination charging supermarkets and fast food restaurants and so on, I recall that, Leonard, you were saying the public space constraints in Hamburg are evident, particularly when you think of fast charging hubs. Do you have a strategy for how to encourage more fast charging at these venues in Hamburg?
Yeah, at first we appreciate it very much when private investors want to go on private ground and build up charging infrastructure there. I think during the ramp up of the e-mobility, this will be a key factor for success. So we need the private investors on private ground to build up the need of charging. And we try in the future to build up like a network and an alliance for charging. We want on the local level, on the Hamburg level, to bring all the partners together, the people who have the ground and the parking lots like supermarkets, and also the CPOs who wants to build up charging infrastructure. And I think we need to bring them together. And that is what we want to do in the future, because in the past, as I said, especially the city of Hamburg built up the charging infrastructure, but in the future, we also want more private investors. And I think that is very necessary.
That sounds great. That sounds a bit like what the Netherlands have also been doing with this multi-stakeholder alliance of progressive.
I can add something to this, because it's very important, right? To as also you saw in the city center of Utrecht, to have all these various options, and to also be careful with your public space, right? One of the things we found out, it's very important if you look at the e-driver to keep in mind the transparency at the infrastructure, for instance, based on pricing, but also easiness in paying at the charging stations. And we actually started OCPP, which is a data protocol in the charging infrastructure, which will allow you will get some monopolies on the infrastructure, as Utrecht said, but you don't want monopoly also on everything else related to that charging infrastructure. And with OTCP, you actually create some space for instance, service providers, transparency on data, and everything else, which is not just owned by the infrastructure builder, right? So I think that's like an important ground rules to make when you're starting building that infrastructure, to make sure it stays easy for the driver, and you don't need 17 passes to move around the city. So I'm curious actually to see how that is fixed in Germany, to make sure that the e-driver is not lost in sight, out of sight.
Okay, I just hear Johannes Pallasch in my mind already mentioning the customer journey that they've outlined with the Leitstelle. Do you want to say a few sentences to user friendliness or on that point?
I wanted to ask her how the Netherlands manages this problem, because, well, as I heard, you fix the price in the public area with 42 cents, but what's happening in the semi-public area? What kind of price do I get there as a customer? Is there any cap, or is it totally free? And then how do you manage the problem that the CPO is totally strong to define the price with other EMPs? So how do you manage this?
Yeah, that's pretty hard to manage, I guess. So the CPO price, or the price of 42 cents, on top of that, depending on your EMSP, an extra fee is added. So, but that depends on the contract you have with your EMSP. But that's a consumer's choice. And then at private locations, chargers can define their own tariffs, of course. But if they tariff too high, they have competition with the public chargers. So if they bring up too high tariffs, the chargers won't be used at private locations.
I see Harmjan nodding. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, actually, I completely agree with what I said about the difficulties in having price transparency and even all transparency in charging infrastructure. Of course, it is very, very important to make it very clear to EV drivers what the prices are and what you're going to pay at your charging session. However, it is very difficult to make a kind of regulation or policy for EMSPs. Actually, it is not possible because there's an open market and everyone is allowed to make their offers. What we did last year was making some ground rules or regulations for CPOs. So in the Dutch law, now it's obligated to CPOs that they are able at least to communicate via apps or websites, etc., the price they charge to the consumers, even on public locations and some semi-public locations. So these locations that are open for everyone to charge, they need to provide price information to the EV drivers, and EV drivers are able to find these prices in their apps or websites, etc. So at least what we're able to do, we did in the regulations, and of course in the AFI discussions as part of Fit for 55. Also, this consumer awareness and consumer information is a big deal. So I expect that it is going to develop in the next years in a positive way for EV drivers as well.
So that means that you only get information for the ad hoc charging, or?
Yeah, it's about ad hoc charging, absolutely right. And but that's difficult. There are some market trends that might be very important for the future of pricing at charging stations. So when the range and battery size of electric vehicles is growing, people are going to use more and more the same charging stations at home, at workplace, and it's not needed anymore to charge everywhere where you go. So I can imagine that for a big group, let's say 60–70% or so, they are going to use the same charging station every week, for example. And in that case, ad hoc pricing, ad hoc payments, or app payment systems is fine. So then you only have the challenge for guest users when you're on holiday, have a long trip from Berlin to Hamburg, for example, or whatever. And we need to fix that part for price transparency, but that's a different situation compared to everyday use of the charging network.
Yeah, that is very interesting for us because with our Germany, the feedback was that too heavy irritation for the market, and you do that, it's will destroy all activities. So the worst case. And what is your experience with this model? Do investors further invest money and charging points, or what's the reaction for this price cap?
So I didn't get the last part because of the connection. Can you repeat it?
Okay, as our price cap was hardly discussed, and so the feedback was it will, we will have irritations in the market, and at the end we will destroy all activities and further investments. So what is your experience now?
Yeah, that's what they said to us as well. So, but we just did it, and then there were some people, some market parties interested. So maybe you should just try it to tender a concession for Hamburg for 10 years and see what happens. You know, CPOs are really eager to get position in this market. And, well, and that's why I think they probably will write into the concession.
I think there are a number of federal pieces of law that are different in the Netherlands and in Germany that define sort of the ground rules for how long you can do these tenders and things like that.
Sure,
but I would
really
like to open the floor to questions from the audience, because there is quite a lot of interest from the audience on to various aspects of this discussion. And I would give the floor to Fanny Tausendteufel, who has selected a few questions.
There are a couple of questions regarding the different usages of public space. So I think they're probably mainly directed at the representatives of the cities, excuse me. Is the location of the chargers only decided based upon the needs of drivers, or are there as well other planning instruments to choose a location for chargers? Excuse me. And how do you justify politically using the scarce public space for charging infrastructure?
Okay, can we briefly start with Utrecht and then Hamburg as well, in terms of how you think about the location for the charger?
Yeah, sure. We have specific guidelines for where a charger can be put and where not, and that within that guidelines there are also some spatial rules on what to do, what are the starting points of a location, if it fits or fits not. I just shared a link in the chat towards the document that's written about that. So we are really looking precisely at what locations could fit the charger and what not. For instance, in front of a door or in front of a window, it's not allowed, and at other locations it is allowed. It's not in greenery, etc. And in historical city center, there's no chargers allowed. It's more in the surrounding areas, and people have to walk a little bit further if they live in the city center. So it's these kind of things rules we look at when placing chargers on the street or finding locations.
And Hamburg?
In Hamburg, we also try to have a macroscopic view on those things. So we try to make a comprehensive network all over the city at first. And we also, from last and this year on, try to look where are charging stations which have a big occupation. So which charging stations are well used, and then we try to booster those locations. When we try to find the exact spot of the charging point, we also try to do a harmonization with our 7 districts. And we have 7 districts in Hamburg, and then we talk with them about the issues on exactly that spot. They try to communicate with all authorities, with the police, with the people who look for green spaces and all these parties. And then we adjust the location if it's not suitable on that exact location. So we always have to investigate the exact position.
Okay, thanks. Do we have more questions in other areas? I've seen that there's a lot of questions being posed in the question and answer also in writing and have been answered in writing. But are there any additional questions that we can take on here?
But I also think that Tobias Wolny is trying maybe to raise his hand.
Sorry, I did not see you.
Yes,
Indeed.
Sorry, yeah, if I may, in the preparation for this event, Kirsten, I mentioned to you that, I mean, big cities face housing shortage, land requirements, demand for space. I think this is an issue that we haven't addressed enough. I mean, I recall some 6-7 years ago, we talked to the state secretary in Berlin for transport, Kirchner at the time, and he said to us, look, you guys take up a lot of space in inner cities. You've got 1-story buildings. Do something about it. Why don't you build a 7-story building, have internet cafes, and integrate all kinds of businesses? Now, at the time, I will admit, we went out of that meeting and said, that's crazy. I mean, we're not a real estate company. But, you know, the more we thought about it and, you know, the discussion has moved on, the more it's worth it to actually discuss this and consider this further, because there may actually be a business potential there in terms of, like, what's the technical term, air right values. Yeah, if we own a property, you know, why not build a multi-story building that is, for example, one idea could be, now we don't have a project like that yet, but we're eyeing a project here in Berlin, where, for example, we would sell a property to a real estate investor. This real estate investor would develop a property integrating a forecourt, or let's say a forecourt with a charging, predominantly with a charging hub, and integrating that with multi-purpose, say, residential, modern residential, and business office building. Now, that could be one way forward, and we're looking at that, and that could potentially be a win-win, you know, for the inner cities with their needs and requirements, and for us also. That's what I wanted to say about demand for space.
I am, of course, enthusiastic about you finding business models that go beyond fossil fuel, and if real estate is the next one, that might be worth looking into. Nancy, I also read in the Netherlands that you have accords with workplaces to build charging stations at workplaces that would also take the load off the public space, and where you go way beyond the EU minimum requirements for charging in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Why do companies do that? And how do you convince them to do that?
Yeah, you're right. So public infrastructure is just one part of a big puzzle, right? In order to facilitate all the ambitions. In the Netherlands, in 2030, 100% of all the new cars sold will be electric. We'll have zero emission zones, as Matthijs said. Utrecht will be one, but there will be 30 in 2025. So no more fossil fuel car will get into city centers. So just relying on public infrastructure would maybe be a little bit gambling, right? So you need the whole area covered. And actually here it's also working, and I think it's really part of it, working with the coalition of the willing here as well. So there's really not a saying, there's really not high force, there's high support. And companies are looking at how they get their companies off the gas, because we want to get off the gas, right? We want to have electric heating. We want to try to be as durable as we can. So that involves solar. How can we put in solar on our roofs, etc.? And it means how can we electrify all our mobility, including our trucks, our buses, our personnel vehicles. And already a coalition of over 200 companies signed that all their lease cars will be electric starting from 2025. So so why do companies want this? Because they know we have a Fit for 55 and we have to move forward. They're already working on their sustainability goals as a company on itself, and electric mobility is just a crucial part of it. And with a helping brigade in order to facilitate that, that's maybe all the push you need in order to get it moving.
I think one of the key differences in the Dutch cities is that you have these very ambitious low emission zones that are kicking in very soon, and that force the discussion a little more than we do here.
Yeah, I think we are trying to balance support, subsidies, let's say the financial support flow with some law, right? And where you say, and this is the line, and you cannot cross it, and no more fossil fuels. And that also creates a lot of movement. So the subsidies route create movement, but the zero emission zones definitely create a lot of movement.
Okay, if there are still one or two questions from the floors, I think we have the time. And then I would move to the final round of the panel debate.
So this is a question for Tobias Walny. BP England apparently says that charging will soon be more profitable than the conventional refueling. How is the situation in Germany? Is that the same, or in what ways might it be different? And would you actually, as BP, participate in tenders, if there were any? We can't hear you. Yeah.
Yes,
perfect.
So we are not a non-for-profit organization. So when I tell you that we want to set up 1,000 chargers by the end of this year and 5,000 in the coming years, there must be business case supporting that. I can't give you any exact numbers, but what I can tell you is it's of course challenging. As of today, it's investment. You can also say it's a bet into the future. It's not that we are really earning much money with this, but we're quite confident that going forward, this will be the way. Otherwise, we wouldn't have chosen this route. I mean, there are other aspects also. For example, look at it holistically. Again, the whole forecourt. We invested into our convenience retail business. Here in Germany, at many of our charging stations or forecourts, we have shops, pretty modern shops, these Rewe to go shops. So the average e-mobility client would spend about 20-25 minutes at our charging station. So would buy a coffee, would buy some groceries there. That comes, the cross-selling, all of this, if you take it as a whole, that plays into it also. So we count on that also, invest in that. That's why this business segment is actually called convenience and mobility for us. We see it as one. So we're definitely confident on that. And in terms of the other question, yes, we take part in tenders. We have taken part in tenders in the past. We have won some tenders also. Now, if you ask me about the Deutschland, which is the one that Johannes Palasch and his team organized, we chose for various reasons not to participate in that one. But no, I don't want to talk about it in a black and white fashion. It just didn't fit our business model. We're going our own way. We profited from the previous tenders, certainly, and we value very much what the Leitstelle Nationale has done for e-mobility and also for the awareness of high power charging. Because that's the one point I didn't mention. When we talk about e-mobility, we talk about, I call it the crème de la crème of charging. We go for high power charging in the 300 to exclusively the 300 to 350 kW segment, which is the most expensive segment. So we're talking about a charging station that would cost something like 400 to 500,000 euros for the whole setup, grid connection, transformer, and the charger. So that's quite investment, and will stay that way. Where there are opportunities, be it at federal level or local level, we will always consider it if it fits into our business model.
Okay, we can take maybe one more question from the floor and a very brief. Yeah, okay, you wanted to briefly say something. Please be quick because we have to find a conclusion of this.
Because I noticed Leonard was also looking at the figures on how much of charging will be done at destinations and how much on central locations. Currently, we see in the Netherlands about 90% of charging is at destinations, and 10% is at this high power charging on the roads, at the petrol stations, for instance. And of this 90%, about 20% is charged at public chargers, and the rest is at private locations or at work. So that's it. I'm really curious what the role of petrol stations will be in the future in this charging network, and whether this figure will shift a little bit more into charging at petrol stations. But what we see is users prefer to charge at their destinations, and especially inner city petrol stations, we don't really see a future for that. So it's interesting to rethink the functions of these locations, and it's good to see that BP is working on it.
You have put an awful lot of AC chargers in place, though, and that's not necessarily the case in other places and other venues here. So,
yeah, but from a user perspective, that makes sense.
That may be, but I still think that high power chargers also are an integral part of a German strategy to build up charging infrastructure quickly.
You must also do it, but nobody is going home, charge for 20 minutes at the petrol station before going home. They want to charge at their destination. It's more convenient.
Could I react to that?
It will be at the expense of the last question from the floor. So can we take the further bilateral discussion to after the meeting? Matthijs and Tobias, one more question from the floor, and then final round, and then we need to close this.
Actually, I think that question, belongs really well at this point, has something to do with a discussion that we're having right now. Last week, Berlin started a project with Ubitricity to install charging points on street lamps. Is this an opportunity to accelerate the charging infrastructure, not only in Berlin, but also for other cities? And could this be the main key for our charging infrastructure?
I would direct the question to Hamburg and Johannes.
Hamburg first, please.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we think that's a very good opportunity because, as also Matthijs said, people want to charge at home. It's very convenient. But we also investigated the topic in Hamburg, and we see that there is a big issue on the grid we have here. It's not that easy to install charging points at light stations. And we do have a separate electricity grid here, for example, in Hamburg, and it's not that easy to integrate it into that grid. It's a very big challenge, and we think it's possibly okay when we do it in new lightning stations. Maybe then we could do pilot projects, but for existing infrastructure, it's very hard to integrate that.
Johannes, quickly.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting and important part because I think we need AC charging hubs in the streets. And as I know, Ubitricity is not only installed in the lamp, so it's a part of the lamp, and I think it's like a smaller charging station. So I think it's a very important part, and I'm very interested in the knowledge we get from this project.
Well, I'm sure our listeners from Ubitricity will be very happy to hear that. Let's give everyone a final word. Imagine it's 2030 and we are convening in Berlin, this time in person. Which electric vehicle do you use and where do you charge it to get to our venue? Can we start with Nancy, please?
Probably I will drive my electric car to you. I've already been driving electric for 5 years, so I'm used to all the, it's getting more convenient every month actually. And then probably I would take some light electric vehicle to come to the venue, right? Or my car, if it's still allowed in the city center, but I'm sure it's not. So it will take some kind of light electric vehicle to make the last mile. So I will be happy to do that in order to keep your air clean in Berlin.
Okay, Tobias?
Well, provided that you decide you still want to have a car, you may still want to go to the forecourt. Why? Because by 2030, the car that you have, not only the Taycan, but others, will be able to charge in 10 minutes, such that you don't have to have range anxiety. So that's one plus. And now I will come back to that, Matthias, believe me, of course, the competition at forecourts is much larger, that's true. At the same time, we feel very much encouraged by customer questionnaires who actually value the fact, I mean, it's simple things, but let me mention them anyway, who value the fact that there's more safety, there's light, there's somebody you can ask, there's, you know, hygiene, toilets, you know, all of that. So that's why people, they go to the forecourts. And if I look at our last year, we sold at our forecourts 24 times in terms of volume sales, as much at the end of the year compared to the beginning of the year, while we increased the number of charging stations only 5 times. So that was quite positive, and for me is a confirmation for forecourts, but I don't want to do it in such an ideological way. Again, it may make absolute sense to go to various, there are different use cases to charge elsewhere. I have no illusions. Today, 80% of the charging is done at home.
Can we?
But for that,
we still have closing words that the Dutch Ministry of Transport has prepared.
Okay.
So please.
Okay, then I'll finish it. So, but for that segment, I still see us as competitive. And the only last point, micromobility is a hugely interesting point, and I would also see a lot of potential in charging for light electric vehicles, and that can also be done at forecourts, actually, as we do.
All right. Okay, so you would also come with light electric mobility. Lennart?
If I had to go to Berlin, I would take the train from Hamburg because the connection is very good. Yeah, but otherwise, I think in maybe 8 or 10 years, I try an electric car when I can get access to one, because at the moment it's very hard to get access to an electric car if you want to buy a car.
I hope the OEMs are listening, German and other OEMs. Harmjan, how are you coming to a venue?
My dream would be to come by an electric plane if it's possible in 10 years, of course, but be more realistic. I suggest some carpooling with the Dutch delegation, of course, with an electric vehicle to Berlin. Expecting that there be a great charging plaza at the venue where we can charge our vehicle via solar or wind power, of course.
That sounds great. Matthijs?
Yeah, I hope the night train is coming back. I thought that was really a convenient way to travel to Berlin, and it stopped 18 years ago or so. So I'm hoping it's coming back. Electric as well, of course.
Okay, and Johannes, you are in Berlin, aren't you?
I am, and I have to charge, and well, I see it's not enough infrastructure. So yeah, what we have now is that we need to activate our municipalities in Germany, and we have to give them information about the targets. We have to give them tools, and I think at the end we have to talk about money, because I think it's not part of Berlin to plan infrastructure in these areas, in the south of Germany, for example. So we have to focus now on street charging. I think this is a big, and well, it can be covered by, well, public space or civics.
We lost you there for a little bit, but it's okay. You are in Berlin and you are still busy with charging in 2030. That's probably good news. Christian is switching on again because he will briefly welcome Ms. Werther, and then we will go to the closing remarks by the Dutch Ministry. Christian, over to you. You're muted. We seem to have technical problems. Give me a signal if I should talk. Should I? I will. Okay. There has been a short technical hiccup here, so we're very happy that Ms. Werther has agreed to speak the final words for this event. Petrushka Werther is the Director for Sustainable Mobility at the Dutch Ministry for Infrastructure and Water Management. And we thank you very much. We know your calendar has been quite crowded as well. So please, Ms. Werther, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me, everybody? Yes, it's okay. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm very, very happy to be here, and I would hope to be invited as well for the meeting in Berlin in 2030. I would probably come by train because traveling by train for that distance is the policy of our ministry. And when arriving in Berlin, I'll probably take a taxi, which I presume will be electric by that time. Or I'll bike if the distance is not too long. Well, I've been able to follow a part of the discussion, which I think was very energetic, and I recognize that from the discussions we have in the Netherlands all the time, because the people who are working in this field are generally very committed to really making this work. It's no longer a question of whether we will have electric vehicles in our streets. We know that we will have electric vehicles in our streets, and I'm very happy that that we will be discussing on a European level the phase out of the internal combustion engine. It's very important as a signal, I think, to everybody in the EU. That we're moving into a new phase, and I'm very happy that Germany and the Netherlands are being able to working together on this subject. When I look at the work ahead of us, I usually think of it as an escape room. We are all together in this escape room, and we need to make some changes in order to have opportunities for everybody to keep on traveling, but not have the negative impacts on the air quality and the climate. And in order to make that so, in the time we have left, we need to exchange all the information, look at the puzzles we have, and just be very active in seeking connections between companies, between cities, between countries, between experts, to find what the difficulties are we are expecting in order to have creative people already thinking of 3 different solutions for every problem. And that's the question with the standards, the payment services, safety issues, and expanding the grid. And what I find sometimes also when I hear this discussion, that there seem to be certainties, but the thing I find is that there are never certainties, and that is also the exciting part of this issue. So I very much applaud everybody who is sharing information, working together to making electric driving through the EU a possibility. I didn't have too much time, but I was asked to tell you about several more meetings where we can meet, hopefully in person. In May, 18 to 20 of May, there will be a visit from a Dutch delegation to Berlin, a deep dive with the Federal Ministry of Transport and Economic Affairs. I think also a very good opportunity to exchanging information. Then the 31st of May, there will be a Dutch-German e-mobility conference in the Hannover Messe. That's especially a business-to-business conference, I think also very, very important, as I mentioned. And then we have something to look forward to in the fall as well, the 5th to 7th of October, the eMove 360 in Berlin, where the Triple Helix will meet up. So I think a lot of points in the calendar to look forward to. And I would like to finish by thanking very much Agora Verkeerswende to reach out to us. And I hope that we can keep on working together. Please don't hesitate to ask us, because we will be very happy to share and discuss with you. And I think the meeting this morning was very helpful to starting or restarting all the connections we have between our countries as neighbors. And on behalf of the organization, I would like to invite everybody in this meeting to please switch on your cameras again in order to see each other for the final moment. Thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Petrushka. My technical problems have been solved too late, unfortunately, but not too late to say thank you very much to you, but all to the participants, to the panelists, and to my colleagues for this very interesting, very lively discussions. And I think there's a lot to do to move the charging infrastructure in our cities ahead. But I'm confident with this exchange and the pragmatic, as always, pragmatic and successful way from the Dutch, we can learn a lot from you to do also good in Germany. Thank you very much. In this sense, I wish you all a great day. My best wishes to Tobias that the symptoms for COVID are going flat. And yeah, hope to see you soon. And in an electrical road transport world in our cities. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Very much. Bye-bye.